This podcast is brought to you by the IIEA, sharing ideas, shaping policy.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. You're very welcome to the Institute of International European Affairs. I'm Alex White, Director General here at the Institute. And my duty, which is a quick one, is simply to welcome you here, to note the presence and to thank Kent Walker and Google for working with us on this event, which I'm sure is going to be a most stimulating and interesting one. A really distinguished, experienced speaker who will be introduced by the chair in just a moment. And our distinguished chair is my colleague and friend, Dr. Orla Quinn, in whose hands you will be for the next period. Orla.
Thanks, Alex. I'll stand up as well just to get us going. So good afternoon, everybody. You're most welcome to the Institute. And I'm very pleased to be your MC today. And I'm very pleased to be chairing this collaboration between the IIEA and Google. So today we're being joined by Kent Walker. He's the President of Global Affairs for Google, and very pleased that he has given us the time out of his busy schedule to speak to us. So just in terms of today, a reminder to you all that this event will be made available publicly in due course. And then just to talk a little bit through the event before I introduce Kent. So we will have a fireside chat. I'm going to call on Kent to give us an opening, few words just to ground us. Then we're going to have a fireside chat between the two of us. I'll ask all the hard questions. And then we'll open up to the audience because, again, I'm sure many of you here will also have a question. So there's a whole range of areas that we can talk about today, and I'm quite sure we'll get to as many of them as we possibly can. I will call on you to identify yourselves and your organizations, if you have one, when you come to ask a question. So before I just formally hand over to Kent, let me just give you a very brief synopsis. He has a very long and extremely impressive CV. But I mentioned already, he's the President of Global Affairs at Google and Alphabet. He oversees content policy, government and regulatory affairs, legal risk and compliance matters. He has had a 30-year career at the intersection of technology, law and policy, and has led Google's advocacy on key issues, and indeed has also served as the first chair of the Global Internet Forum to Combat Terrorism. He's a Harvard and Stanford Law graduate. He was previously a US attorney and held executive positions at both Netscape, AOL and eBay. He now serves on TechNet's executive committee and also the Council on Foreign Relations. So I have no doubt we will have a very, very interesting discussion. I actually had the pleasure myself of meeting the Google team and Sundar Pichai in California because they were awarded the IDA Special Achievement Award, and they've made a huge investment in Ireland and a huge contribution to us here. So without further ado, I'm going to ask Kent to come to the podium and kick us off on our event. Thank you.
Moment for us in geopolitics and in technology. And Ireland is in many ways the perfect place to have this discussion. We have been in Ireland for something like 22 years now. We have 6,000 Googlers who work down in the Bullens Mill area. I started off my day working in a conversation at a Fair Play Cafe, which is a new digital cafe in the Docklands, meeting with principals from local schools who are using AI in different ways to help inspire their next generation of students and think about the potential that this has. And Ireland more broadly is in a remarkable position because of its leadership, its digitization, being at the forefront of, that we think of them as digital forerunners. We were talking earlier, Orla and I, about the degree of optimism or pessimism. The Irish are remarkably optimistic about the potential of AI. We did a recent poll of different countries around the world. 78% of people in Ireland said that they were looking forward to finding ways of putting AI to use in their daily lives. And we are seeing this remarkable span from everyday tools. And I say that if you've been using AI for many years, most of you, if you've used Google Search or Maps or Translate or even Gmail, you've been using AI behind the curtain. It's now just sort of stepped out from behind the curtain. But we're at a moment where we're seeing this remarkable breakthrough in how we make breakthroughs. Science is changing before our eyes. We are seeing advances in healthcare, in diagnosis, in material science. Imagine a battery that costs a tenth as much but holds 10 times as much energy. We're seeing potential changes in the development of nuclear fission, nuclear fusion, clean water for people around the world. So from the everyday to the extraordinary, it's a remarkable time. But at the same time, we're at a moment of remarkable geopolitical tension and turmoil. And there too, Ireland is in an interesting position, an important position, as a key bridge in the transatlantic relationship and as a leader in Europe. As many of you appreciate, Ireland is the home to literally the majority of the companies that have been designated under the Digital Markets Act, the Digital Services Act, the AI Act that Europe has passed. So that means that Ireland's regulators, from its privacy regulators to its content regulators to its competition regulators to the new AI office that will be created soon, are really at the vanguard of shaping European policy for what this new AI era will look like. And it's a critical responsibility at a time when Europe is looking at challenges it faces with regard to competitiveness. The European Union used to have an economy that was the same size as America's economy in roughly 2008. Today, the American economy is 20 or 30% larger. And most economists attribute that to the rise of digitization. In talking with former Italian Prime Ministers Mario Draghi and Enrico Letta, they've issued reports which illustrate the importance of a fluid capital market, but also a streamlined regulatory infrastructure that make it easier for companies to grow up. Europe doesn't suffer from a lack of talent or a lack of ideas. If anything, Europe has accounted for something like a third of the patented ideas we've seen around the world. The challenge is the scaling up. How do small companies deal with complex regulations? How do they access capital in different ways? 60% of European businesses say that their primary barrier to more investment is the regulatory climate. And in the digital space, we've seen a rush to regulate, with Brussels passing more than 100 different new digitally focused bills just since 2019. So the more we can think of the focus on streamlining, of simplification, the new digital omnibus that's being discussed in Brussels now, the more this potentially opens up the European economy to this reset button that's offered by AI. They're trying to put these new technologies to work in different ways. So I look forward to our conversation today, both Orla's questions and yours, about how we can be a constructive force in that conversation, how Google can support Ireland's growth, both in education and employment, and the wider adoption of these new technologies, because adoption and diffusion is key. Oftentimes, technology races are not won by the first to invent, but by the best to deploy. So as we work through those kinds of challenges, we want to double down our investment in Ireland. We have over 1,000 engineers working here, trying to make sure that what we build is fit for purpose in Ireland and in Europe. We have our GSEC, the Google Safety Engineering Center, that's located right here in Dublin. So the more we can do to support Ireland and the more we can do to support Europe as it transforms from this new era, this is a fascinating, critical moment, and we want to play our part. So look forward to our conversation and look forward to the questions from Orla. Thank you for coming.
Thanks, Kent. I think there's just so many topics we can cover. We can look at competitiveness, security, you mentioned AI, regulation, our presidency coming up the second half of this year. So let me just start perhaps and talk about competitiveness, because that's a major priority for Ireland, obviously a major priority for Europe and indeed the world in general. But if you look at it from an EU perspective, since the publication of the Draghi and the Letta reports, there's been a really strong or renewed focus on that area of competitiveness, particularly on the digital economy. So could you let me have your thoughts just on the policy development since the publication of the Draghi report and where you think Europe is and whether the policy is heading in the right direction.
The ambition, we think, is the right one. The competitiveness agenda is clearly critical to the continued growth of Europe. The challenge is to make sure that the action matches the ambition. Of the recommendations in the Drawing report, something like the mic is not working as well as it could. Okay, yes, thank you. I appreciate the flag. So just to summarize, the goal is to make sure that the action matches the ambition. In the Drawing report, something like 11% of the recommendations in the past year have actually been enacted. So it's challenging to redo regulations, to redo structures that have been in existence for some time, but it's critical. So as Europe has opportunities with things like the digital omnibus, which is meant to be a streamlining moment, there really needs to be a focus, a firmness, a purpose in making sure you get the ball across the goal line.
I suppose you always have the difficulty of a number of member states, and people are at different levels of their journey with competitiveness and how we balance that. And you mentioned in your opening comments there just that Ireland certainly would wish to be ahead on the AI, because while we're all collaborators, we're also competitors. And that's another issue that we deal with. Ireland, we want to be a global leader in the adoption of AI. And indeed, we'll be setting up a new national office this year to coordinate and ensure consistency amongst our regulatory communities. But do you think we're ready for that, or should we be doing more in terms of AI? I'm looking at opportunities and risks. You touched on some of the opportunities. Just the role that AI will play, huge investment, huge dollars and euros going into it. Will it deliver is the question.
We are placing quite a wager that it will, and we are optimistic. We have never seen a technology that has had this dramatic rate of change. It surprised in some ways our engineers, who didn't sense that it had the capability of not just summarizing the words that have been written over the centuries, but distilling some of the knowledge and the insights that were contained in those words. And so it becomes a remarkable tool for prediction, for analysis, for summarization. And that's just the large language models. We're seeing parallel advances with regard to the ability to understand things like proteins. Let me give you just one quick example. Something called AlphaFold, which some of you may be familiar with. Our DeepMind team in London worked on. The human DNA had been analyzed 20, 25 years ago, but it turned out that just understanding the order of the letters didn't tell you all that much about what kind of medications could be produced, because the shape of the proteins, what's called how the proteins folded, is really critical. If you have a virus with a certain sort of spikes, you need one vaccine. If the spikes are shaped differently, you need a different vaccine. The problem was there are 200 million different proteins in your body. And it used to be, until a couple of years ago, it took a biology PhD student an entire thesis, 3 or 4 years, to understand how a single protein was folded. Our DeepMind team took on that problem, and over the course of a summer, came up with a tool that correctly predicted the folding of all 200 million proteins. So to put that somewhat differently, it's though you took every man, woman, and child in Europe and trained them to be a biology PhD researcher and had them do nothing but fold proteins for a year. And that's just one of 1,000 different advances we're going to see. And those tools, by the way, have now advanced. They now understand dynamic folding. They understand how proteins interact. They understand how different elements of the human body interact, and that's leading to breakthroughs and acceleration in how we develop medications and personalized drugs. So we see this dramatic upside, but again, we need to put it to work. So we are working with the Irish government and others to try and to start up AI training sessions in cities and towns across Ireland to make sure there's an awareness of what these tools can do, again, not just at the scientific breakthrough level, but how it can improve everyday lives for people, how teachers can use them for lesson planning, for example, Those sorts of applications, I think, will be equally important because, again, the diffusion, the adoption is really key. And the polling also shows that the more people use AI, the more optimistic they become. It becomes a familiar, useful tool for them. At the same time, we want to make sure we have guardrails and act in a responsible way. There are questions about the future of education, and some will say, students will use these tools to write their essays for them. We need to have different ways of evaluating students. You could say that the personalized AI tutors are actually a much more effective way to teach students. We are seeing students learning more in months than they used to learn in years in classrooms of 30 students. But is there too much emphasis on screen time? So these are important questions to work through. The future of employment, how do new jobs evolve? There are always new jobs out there. 60% of the jobs we have today didn't exist 80 years ago. My father used to joke that my grandfather took his shower at the end of the day, not the start of the day, because a job involved getting dirty and sweaty. You would think of what I do as a vacation. I get to talk to nice people all day. That evolution is going to be a constant. We have looked at, John Maynard Keynes said in the 1920s or so that by now we'd be working 15-hour weeks. And he was right if we had been satisfied with 1920s levels of consumption. But human desire for new and better things to expand our universe is a constant. And so what new jobs will be created as we go through this J curve? Originally, there's some displacement. The first thing you do is to just do everything you've been doing the same and do it more cheaply, because that doesn't take much imagination. But the upswing in the J curve is really where the action is. That's how do you grow revenue? How do you grow demand? How do you create new services? When Steve Jobs created the iPhone, nobody was thinking that 2 years later, somebody would come up with the Uber application to transform transportation. But once everybody had a phone in their pocket, that opened up new possibilities. Now that everybody has intelligence in their pocket, what new possibilities open up before us? So it's a fascinating time, but we have to work together to make sure we're making the most of it.
Yeah. I mean, there's always that fear of job losses. I remember my first job in the public service, we were digitizing the telephone directory. Imagine trying to explain to somebody young now what a telephone directory was. So I think there is always that. And part of that, and what's interesting, I think now is it's moving over into the arts and the craft and the multimedia sector, AI. And maybe just that fear of copyright is a factor, and how we manage that and guard against it. And I'm sure even within Google themselves, there must be jobs, Kent, that people are thinking, will I still be doing this job in X number of months or years?
Yeah, I think it's right that, jobs will change, and we need to think about how we do retraining and getting people skilled for this new reality. Now, the good news is AI is the easiest tool to learn that we've ever seen. A hammer doesn't teach you how to hit a nail, but AI will teach you how to ask better AI prompts. It also has some interesting effects. Some of the first applications are at the white collar level, not the blue collar level, which at a time when we've been worried about income inequality might actually be a healthy thing in some ways. It also upskills the least skilled people the most. Everybody benefits from the tools, but the upper half might benefit 10%, whereas the new starters might benefit 50%. So I think it will have some valuable attributes as we try and move through this transition. But it will be a transition. You touched on the copyright point. As we work with the creative industries, how do we encourage people to use these new tools for creative new purposes, create new songs, new art that have never been created before? Again, in our morning conversation, I heard a story about the faculty of music had never talked to the faculty of art. But now you can use AI tools to say, what song does this picture create? What picture does this song suggest? It's very interesting ways of thinking that we hadn't explored before. So those sorts of innovations, we have Wyclef Jean or will.i.am using AI trained on their back catalog to say, I'm interested in doing something more like this. And instantaneously, you have versions of that they can mix and match and use taste and judgment to come up with a new style and type of creation that wouldn't have been possible before. And it empowers almost all of us to, you don't have to be a great draftsman anymore to create a lovely picture. You have to have imagination and creativity. So what barriers does it remove even as we transition? So it is a fascinating time.
It is, and certainly I think for our education systems, like in Ireland, we have the highest level of STEM graduates in the European Union per thousand of population, but we also have very significant parts of our population that are not digitally literate, don't mind AI literate. And it's just, I suppose, that trying to, as you say, rise all the boats and how we can best do that is, I think, a factor, a feature for every country really that's looking at it.
And now in a world with vibe coding, if you don't know what vibe coding is, just to clue you in, it's the ability to code. I grew up punching punch cards with paper clips to actually learn how to code. You can now basically say, I would like to create a website that is designed to appeal to people in their 20s in Dublin who are looking to buy flowers. And it will create a website for you like that without you having to write a line of code. It's really quite remarkable that the overlay of natural language processing to translate your desire into anything a computer can do. And a computer can do a lot of things. It's going to be a fascinating transition. It's going to open up great new opportunities for a lot of people for whom coding or drafting or something was a barrier.
So what about the negatives, Kent? What about the cybersecurity, hybrid warfare, foreign interference, all the negative aspects? How do you guard against that? How does Google guard against it? And then I might come back and talk more broadly about regulation and the EU.
Yeah, these are all serious issues and issues we take seriously. Touching wood, you have not seen some of the challenges on our services that you may have seen on others in recent days. And that's not an accident. That's because we are spending a lot of time so-called red teaming, double checking, and assessing the quality and integrity of our services before we're rolling them out. Now, I should say, Google right now serves 16 billion search results a day. So a way of thinking about that is a 1 in a million chance happens 16,000 times a day. That leads to lots of edge cases and lots of opportunities to get things wrong. But we are very focused on the security of the tools we're creating. We're partnering with governments on a lot of this work. Later in the week, I'll be at the Munich Security Conference working on some of the global security issues, cybersecurity, resilience, undersea cables, which are of interest to Ireland and others. Those issues we have to take very seriously. And there are ways of doing it, working both within companies and between companies. We are working with the Frontier Model Forum on advanced metrics and frameworks for assessing the capabilities of tools. We're working with a group founded by Adobe, actually, called C2PA, by the Content Provenance and Authoritativeness Association, working on the notion of how do you tell something is an AI creation or not? So that if there are efforts to interfere with elections, for example, it's easier for people to know what's an original non-AI creation and what's an AI creation. Of course, we have to be a little careful because many things that the line between AI and not AI is not the same as same between the truth and a lie, because there can be misrepresentative photographs not using AI, and there can be AI enhancements. Somebody shows a picture with the Capitol in the background rather than something else. Nobody is deceived by that. So we have to make sure we're really giving people full context on the creation of stuff. If you use, and you've probably used AI in your photographs without knowing it, if you've used red eye removal, for example, or sorted through, there's these subtle touches that AI will do color enhancement in different ways. So how do we distinguish those sort of cosmetic changes from truly misrepresentative photos or videos now that could actually change the result of an election? So that's going to be a shift for all of us, for platforms, for the journalists, and for the general public in our understanding of how we think about the authenticity and accuracy of different kinds of content. We're also focused, as we touched on earlier, about the notion of foreign state actor, state actor and commercial attacks on digital resilience. On the one hand, it's the same old cat and mouse game we're used to. It's just being played at accelerated speed. we are optimistic that some of the work we've done, our friends at Anthropic have done with regard to being able to identify bugs in existing code and software are making our walls more resilient against attack. We have a tool called Code Mender, which will not only identify bugs, it will go off and automatically fix them. So it allows engineers to monitor their networks, to understand their weaknesses, and to repair them before the bad guys have a chance to exploit the weaknesses. But this is an effort that can't just be one platform or even all the platforms. We have signals intelligence, but governments have human intelligence. It needs to be a collaborative effort to make sure we get that right. So we're very much embarked on that exercise.
Okay. And I think obviously this is something that every government is looking at, particularly in terms of the misinformation and election fraud and all of those areas, that they are huge challenges for everyone. In looking at that, then that kind of brings me on to the role of regulation. And the EU obviously has been very active in this area in recent years, and just in November then published the simplification regulation package. Would you just comment from Google perspective in terms of your view of EU regulation? Some people say too much, some people say not enough.
We have said for years, in fact, I think we first said in Dublin, I was here with Sundar in the 2017 or so, AI is too important not to regulate and too important not to regulate well. And getting that nuance of smart regulation, savvy regulation, and regulations informed by evidence, understanding is really critical. So at the moment, there has been there have been a number of new regulations coming out of Brussels. Digital Markets Act, Digital Services Act, AI Act, potentially Digital Fairness Act, and roughly 100, actually more than 100 different regulations touching on the digital sector, as I mentioned a moment ago. The challenge there is not that the goals of regulation are wrong. It's making sure they're fit for purpose, understanding the trade-offs between different imperatives. On some level, from a competition perspective, competition regulators might want you to share information with everybody, whereas privacy regulators might want you to keep information to yourself. How do you square that circle? And how do regulators work together to make sure they're working not in narrow silos, but in a whole of government, whole of economy, whole of society kind of way? So that's the simplification. That's the streamlining that we'd be advocating for. It's not a call for no regulation. It's a call for better regulation. And we think working together with the companies at the coalface who are dealing with some of these trade-offs today, we can share the benefits of our experience, the benefits of our mistakes. I was always told that it's always cheapest to profit from the other guy's mistakes. So if there are learnings to be had, if we can share those with governments, that's a way of establishing better regulation and more nimble regulation. I think in a time when technology is proceeding this quickly, it's not realistic to think of future-proof regulation. I think certainly there's a goal to have certainty and reliability. A framework that businesses can rely on is valuable for any company looking to grow. But regulation also has to be nimble enough to recognize that the technology of 2 years ago is different than the technology of today, is going to be different than the technology 2 years from now. So how do we do that in a cooperative, collaborative way where we share goals like protecting children, avoiding misuse, avoiding cyber attacks? There's not a dispute about those goals. The question is how to do that in the savviest way that promotes the growth of the economy and the society.
Okay, interesting. I mean, we've seen some of that, and we've seen the discussion moving, both in terms of competitiveness and some of this, I think, came out of COVID as well, strategic autonomy. Now we're talking about digital sovereignty. And a country like Ireland, where 5 of the 7 meta companies are headquartered, have their EU headquarters here, is obviously we have a deep interest in these areas, and obviously would agree regulation is hugely important, protection is hugely important. But other European governments might go further than Ireland. So again, we don't all sing off the same hymn sheet.
Right.
They might. So I suppose I'm trying to think how US companies in Ireland would balance that at EU level, and how you work on that in terms of digital sovereignty.
So you're right that Ireland has been a leader in both the transatlantic discussions and in an open digital trade order. We're a multinational company. We are in favor of trade. We think trade has benefited the spread of technology, and technology has benefited trade. And as a result of those two factors, it's easy to forget that we're in an unprecedented era. In the last 30 years, 1.2 billion people have come out of extreme poverty. It's never happened before in the history of the world. That's millions of babies who didn't die. That's millions of children who didn't die of malnutrition. That's millions of families who had access to clean water and a decent income. That's a huge benefit. And we need to maintain a commitment to that goal, even as we recognize that there may be places when it comes to national security where there is a desire for more autonomy, more ability to control one's own destiny. But it's easy to remember, or it's easy to forget, that true economic autonomy risks being code for poverty, that you're only eating the food that you can grow in your backyard. And you'd rather have an environment where you're able to take advantage of everything in the world. So we think there's a way through this. We think there's a concept of open digital sovereignty that allows the notion of control, that allows the countries to control their own destiny and to have operational influence over the tools that are being used, while not denying their businesses and their societies access to the best tools the world has to offer. Europe deserves the best tools in the world. And to get that, in many ways, there's always going to be a complementarity. In the same way, America relies on a Dutch company for advanced chip production. There are places where European companies rely on American companies for cloud services or various other things. That should be harmonizable in the right way. That there are efforts afoot. We have worked with European companies, Thales, Proximus, TIM, the Schwarz Group in Germany, to allow a partnership arrangement where our services are made available through European companies, and those European companies have control over the offering of the services. So that is, in a sense, the best of both worlds. But it's a tricky one to navigate. We have to recognize the concerns on both sides and the differing concerns from the D9, the digital nine, of which Ireland is a leader, as well as other points of view from throughout Europe. And I know this is a conversation that's happening in Brussels and happening throughout Europe right now. We're hoping to be able to navigate this successfully in a way that works for everybody.
Yeah, I mean, obviously that is the goal that we would all seek to achieve. I think we saw quite an amount of that during COVID, where we had very strong international cooperation and the positives that came from that. But it's how do you build on that? How do you build on the positive and counteract the negative? Can be extremely difficult, I think. But that's obviously part of what you're trying to achieve. Okay. Final question for me, and then I might open it up to the floor. We will hold the presidency of the Council of the EU from 1st of July. Could you just talk a little bit about what role you think Ireland could play and how it could contribute to EU policy making during the presidency?
Yes, it's a seminal moment, and it couldn't be better timed given everything that we're seeing around the world. In talking with the Irish government, I think our points have been similar to what we've talked about today: simplification, security, and if I could add, interoperability, allowing different frameworks that work across the world, which allows the scaling up of these new tools. And the rise of AI is, in a way, it's like the rise of algebra. It's a scientific breakthrough that will benefit everybody in the world, but it will benefit the countries and the regions that apply it the most, that apply it the best, the most. So how do we work together to encourage that, to allow Europe to be a place where AI diffuses and widely lifts up companies? That requires digitization, as Ireland has already pioneered in some ways. And it requires a certain optimism about the future. I mean, pessimism can be challenging because it leads you to not take risks. It leads you to not invest. It leads you to not embrace short-term pain for long-term gain.
And so a spirit of looking forward to a Europe 2050 vision, where there is a path forward that makes European scientists and scholars optimistic about being able to found their own companies and create an entrepreneurship culture that is even stronger than the one Europe has today, I think will be critical. So Ireland's presidency is a moment with things like the AI summit that's being talked about here in Dublin in the fall, to really refocus Europe on an optimistic version of the future, a version of what could be possible if we put all these tools to work for us.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much, Kent. We've covered a wide range of topics.
This podcast is brought to you by the IIEA, sharing ideas, shaping policy.